Hello, and welcome to episode 74 of the Great Canadian Hockey Podcast. I'm James Parisi here with my co-host Aiden Sarah after a lengthy holiday break. We didn't mean to hit you guys with that much of a break, but life happens. We both had a lot of stuff come up. I'm not going to go too far into it because I think we could have a whole podcast about everything Aiden and I have dealt with in the past, I don't know, 25 days. It's been a little bit ridiculous, but I hope all of you amazing listeners of ours had a great holidays with your family, with your friends, whatever else there may be. Um, Aiden, I think we're going to skip over the holiday stuff because we have so much hockey to
Yeah,
get to.
dude. Well, we're definitely not going to skip over the holiday stuff later because we'll come back around to the World
Okay.
Juniors and all that it was the World Juniors this year in Ottawa, which is just so loaded of a topic. But yeah, let's start with the NHL. I'm good to start with tonight in the NHL too, James. Honestly, if you want.
Yeah, sure. If you are listening, I imagine that's on Thursday, January 16th. We were recording on Wednesday, January 15th, on a bit of a quiet night where there's only two games. Aiden, do you want to talk about the Oilers and Minnesota Wild?
Yeah, worth mentioning, Ryan McLeod ended up with a hat trick for Buffalo. They won today. But the game I watched was Minnesota Edmonton, and I find myself watching a lot of Oilers games, James. Just that I have the
Oh,
Sportsnet
because
West
that's your
region.
job?
Well, yeah, that too. So we I'm watching this team, and every time Minnesota pops up, it feels like I'm watching Matt Boldy being possessed by just like the dog that's always in him is just so much more out when Boldy plays the Oilers, and it was so the exact same thing today. Like I could go on a rant just gushing about this first period that Boldy played. He's so good on that power play for Minnesota. He had 5 goals and 6 points in the last five going into today, and he had a goal and a primary assist within the first few minutes. But massive credit to the Oilers because Minnesota went up 2 buzz early on. Again, without Kaprizov there, they got Eriksson Ek back, and Eriksson Ek's playing well in that top six. Boldy with a goal and an assist. But Edmonton surged back. They pushed. They played a good hockey game after they went down 2 buzz. They end up winning it. Calvin Pickard gets the victory, and um, I was going to say, little piece of me, James, thought maybe Edmonton Oilers Tristan Jarry. Anything close to that popped through your head when you saw Jarry go on waivers today?
No, the only thing I thought is that he's going straight to the minors and they're going to have to trade something with him in the offseason to get rid of him.
Yeah, that was my thinking. Was even if they wanted him, they would have to get him at 50% retained, right? Like it's not as if you know it's not as if, like you said, the Pittsburgh Penguins are in a spot of tremendous leverage here because they are, according to a source close to the team, James, you cite him down here. Josh Yeo of the Athletic said that, and I think the exact quote from him was the Penguins have reached a breaking point with Tristan Jarry, right? And if that's known around the league, there's no way that somebody's going to take that money. But today, like Stuart Skinner has been solid of late, and Calvin Pickard played himself a great game today. So it's just funny the same day that I have the Edmonton and a goalie thought their backup maybe proves that he's okay. He's ready to stay in that 1B role that I think they need him to be in to succeed.
I don't hate the idea of the Sharks claiming him. Finding a way to move on from Georgiev, who they've already got and will probably move on from again. And then you just roll Jari and Askarov. I don't hate that.
Yeah, because Askarov's going to be on the ELC, right? He'll be on the cheap contract for a couple of years. It's not like they need the space. But again, if you're San Jose, why are you claiming him instead of saying to Pittsburgh, yeah, give us a second, a second interest, and we love him, right? If
Because they seem to not hate the idea of doing teams favors, I
Yeah, I
guess.
know. You're right
But
about that, actually. The Jake Wallman thing comes to mind. While we're on Pittsburgh, we are racing through this, by the way. If the pacing seems quick, it's intentional. We have a lot to get through today, and we obviously want to talk a lot about this World Junior Championship that just happened. But we'll stay in Pittsburgh for now because oh, Evgeny Malkin had a brutal afternoon a couple days ago.
Okay, Aiden, I'm going to rant about this for a second. I'm not going to let it get long because, as you said, we've got a lot to get through. But who the hell steals a man's Stanley Cup rings? Not Stanley Cup ring. It's not one. It's not two. All three of Gino's Cup rings are gone because some burglar who definitely targeted him. This is a thing where athletes who are on the road get targeted. It happens a lot in the NFL, NBA. I haven't heard of it as much in the NHL. I mean, Drew's car being stolen is the only thing I can think of in recent memory. But what the hell, man? I know a lot of players don't care as much about these cup rings as we do. After they've had them for a couple years, I've heard that from a lot of players in interviews. I can't speak to every single player or a percentage on the matter, but what the hell? Come on. Like, you know what? Steal a TV. You're not going to be able to sell that cup ring unless it's like a private black market kind of thing. It's going to get circled back to you. You can't just move that. So, Aiden, this brings the question for me. Is this a super fan slash burglar who wants these rings for themselves?
Oh God, I don't know, man. I
Because you
can't
can't sell
imagine.
that.
It would be hard to imagine somebody being devoted enough to do it, but think about what Evgeny Malkin would have given that man's organization, right? Like that seems like, like you can have the desire to own those, but I feel like if you're a fan to the point to want it that much, you'd also got to be a fan to the point of not like caring enough not to. You know what I mean?
Totally. I mean, I'm not gonna drag this on. The last thing I'll say about this is give his damn rings back. Find like bring them to a police station or a fire hall and lie and say that these came into your pawn shop or something like that and just make sure they're returned. This is a joke. This is an absolute joke. You don't deserve those rings. You didn't win anything. In fact, you're kind of a loser. Sorry, dude. Um, yeah, this just in. James Parisi, co-host of the Great Canadian Hockey Podcast, calls Stanley Cup ring burglar a loser. Yeah. Okay. I'm done there. Let's move on to Washington, where Alexander Ovechkin is continuing his dominant, exceptional, historic, whatever adjective you want to use, career. The man broke his leg and then was back on skates and back in the lineup in what was it, less than 2 months?
At his age too, right? Like
It
the
was like 40
rehabs.
something days.
Yeah. The rehab is one thing on its own, but for the man in his late 30s to, yeah, be able to recover. And again, like if there was any worry that Alexander Ovechkin was rushing back in some sort of significant way,
No,
the quality of his play, yeah, would say otherwise, no doubt. He's up to 20
Aiden,
goals on the year, which
Aiden,
means
I
something
have
cool.
something really important to say. I'm sorry I
Okay,
interrupted you, but
okay, we'll
uh,
get back to that. What was your
they
thing?
they are the people in the comment sections are calling for piss tests, and then all of the replies say all you're gonna find is Dr. Pepper and ketchup in pasta sauce.
Is that his thing? Like, is that
Yeah,
notable?
yeah, yeah. He'll get the Alfredo in there, he'll get the marinara, and then he'll just cover the whole thing in ketchup. Yeah. Ovi crosses his sauces and does a lot of crazy things. And apparently if he wasn't Ovi, it would piss some guys off.
If he wasn't Obi, he's yeah, he's 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 a beast. Him and Gordie Howe, the only two players with 20 straight 20 goal seasons. That's the significance of his 20 goal year this year as well. So again, just more exemplifying and more feeling really the yeah, this is history we're witnessing, and again, the march towards the prize at the end, which is the goal record, continues.
Poetry in motion. And let's take this to Vancouver where it's the opposite
Oh,
of poetry. It's kind of a
uh,
joke. It's a drama center. I think I heard um more enticing and less dramatic things when I was in high school walking past a group of ninth grade girls gossiping. Let's get to this because we've kind of been dodging it for a couple months and not talking about it a ton. Let's get to this Miller Pedersen drama. You ready?
Yeah, well, and again, the kind of the I guess the reason that at least in my head that I didn't really want to talk about it was because I wasn't of the opinion that there was much there, right? Like it felt overblown because you know what Vancouver media is, right? You know what the buzz around this team is, and it usually is, the smallest thing turned up to 100,000 on the freakout meter. So, but you can only ignore it.
Just before you dive in, if people don't understand what the Vancouver media landscape is and what the fans are like, especially on social media, this is the only market in the NHL, I think, where a player can get traded and then the fans are like, well, we're pretty sure that a good-looking guy on the team slept with his wife or fiance. So that's why he got moved. This is like the only place in the NHL where that's a thing, where fans will be like that.
You hear all sorts of like crazy stuff, right? Like, and again, most of it doesn't have weight, but again, right now it seems as if we have reached a point with the Canucks and this Miller Pedersen thing that there is absolutely something there. Like at this point, it's just denying what seems like an obvious fact if we say that there's nothing there, because it's pretty widely reported on that these two personalities just do not mix, and the boiling over, right, of the two chemicals that shouldn't be mixed together is starting to really seep into this team, and they've been a little bit all over the place of late. They played an excellent game against Toronto on Saturday, followed up by a really bad one against Winnipeg this week. So again, like it's it's hard to say that this team is not suffering on the ice for this, right? Like at the end of the day, I know that Pedersen's been hurt, Quinn Hughes has been hurt, Hronek's been hurt, like they're Demko as well. Like they haven't been 100% healthy, but they have they've been in some turmoil. Um, James, it's funny, right? Because you're a Colorado Avalanche fan, so you're very familiar with the concept of the superstar who is very demanding of himself and his teammates, because that is quite famously what Nathan MacKinnon is. Nathan MacKinnon had riffs with teammates as well, who would go on to say in interviews after, like, often criticized the very demanding way he was. But at the end of the day, he's one of the most dedicated athletes. And at like we're in 2024, 11 years into his 2025, we're 11 years into his professional career, and he's an unbelievable hockey player right now. Like he
I,
is the
I will
best version of almost any player that I've seen in their prime. Like you can put Crosby on that list. You can put like there's Crosby, there's Ovechkin, there's McDavid, but like the way Nathan MacKinnon is dominating hockey games is unbelievable right now. Like it is truly like he could easily win the Hart Trophy this year, and I wouldn't remotely balk at that. Like I know Draisaitl's getting a lot of love, but he's had himself an amazing year again. Um, so in my opinion, I'm not going to diss Nathan MacKinnon for his seriousness, right? Like Jonathan Taves was considered Captain Serious. That was his nickname. And while that was his nickname, he won 3 Stanley Cups and 2 Olympic gold medals in 6 years, right? So you know what? Captain Serious, do your thing. Um, but what also would happen in Colorado, again, according to much of the reporting from former players and whatnot, is that the captain Gabriel Landeskog was an excellent mediator, right? Like his personality and his calmness in that dressing room was something that diffused any sort of boiling over. And Vancouver has had, I think, situations now where like it wasn't a secret that there was something there when Bo Horvat got traded to, right? Like that was that was very widely reported on at the time as well. So if I'm looking at this at this point, I see JT Miller as the Nathan MacKinnon, right? The dedicated superstar who's doing anything to win. And I'm just looking at that Canucks roster, and I think that it's at this point just they don't have a mediator right now, right? Rick Tockett's personality is to be very demanding as well, right, of his players. Like, um, it, it's Miller's personality, and again, right, there's no Gabriel Landeskog that's got a leash on Miller the way that Landeskog can calm McKinnon down and can keep him in check. Other thing about this, James, at this point, this has led to the fact that Vancouver are listening to trades on both of them from anybody, which is something you don't see often. A team's second and third best players both being like, yeah, take your pick, make an offer, take a swing.
And is it confirmed that they're openly listening to offers and saying to teams, well, what do you have? Or is it that everyone is seeing the blood in the water and they are going, huh, well, would you take this?
There are enough credible sources that Vancouver is openly listening because even to the point that this week there was a reliable source that had said Vancouver's even not opposed to trading him within their own conference, right? Like they're not just exclusively listening to Eastern Conference teams. They will trade either of them within the Western Conference for the right deal. Um, right deal. Speaking of, um, the only confirmed trade offer that we know was made was Mika Zibanejad from the New York Rangers for JT Miller. It was a 1-for-1 deal. Um,
Or at least that was the idea at one point. Like there could have been other pieces involved at other times. We don't know that for sure, but at least at one point it was a one for one.
I believe it was Rick Dollywall. I might be wrong about that, but I believe I saw Rick Dollywall report that Vancouver have apparently asked for Braden Schneider in every single deal conversation with the New York Rangers.
Right.
And that's the tipping point there, which makes sense in terms of team need, right?
Totally.
Um, yeah, I don't know. Anything else, James? We were talking before, and I think it's a little bit of a pot shot at maybe some fans at other sports, but it the most frustrating part about this to me is that this sort of inner team drama between superstars, like this is the kind of stuff that I laugh at in other sports that I don't take seriously. That is like
Right.
like the petty like like and the fact that we're at a point right now that like James, one of these players just took an unexplained leave of absence. Like that could be imagine the imagine how significant this could be for that to have been a part of this, right? And we don't know. And I don't want to speculate. I don't want to say, oh, it could have been this, it could have been this, because God knows there's enough of that going on. But this feels like such a loaded story, and we unfortunately where it's January 2025, there's a good chance that 12 months from now we don't have the whole picture of what the hell was going on here, right? Even if either or neither of those players have moved on from the team.
I don't think we know even 30% of the story until a few years from now.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, one last comment on this before we take things to, I don't know, a little more, I feel positive of a sphere of hockey news. I just feel like it's a better NHL where when we don't care that much about their personal lives and personal opinions. It's like it's taking away from the atmosphere that's always been around hockey where it's like it's like a pretty noble thing. It's it has this air to it where it draws you in and it makes you feel special and you feel something when watching the sport and when hearing the news and when chatting about it with your friends. And it's turned to, oh my God, did you hear this? Well, what if this happened? Oh my God, this is crazy.
Yeah,
Dude, I
yeah,
don't watch sports for it to be like reality
yeah.
TV. I love an HBO 24/7 or face off inside the NHL. Totally. That's different. That is super different. That's learning about what makes these guys tick and some storylines behind how things worked. But no, this is, oh my God. this might have happened because this happened. Well, do you think it's because this guy thinks this about this guy? Dude, like, shut up.
Yeah, no, no, no. You're right. You're right. You're right. It feels like we're talking about this in a very in a very we have to talk about this gossip, right? Like that's almost the way we're
Growing up,
addressing it
my
right
mom watched The Real Housewives of whatever stupid city. I don't know, all of them. Like I think she watched all of them. She likes reality TV. Lots of people do, whatever. Um, that's what this feels like when I would walk in the kitchen and grab a snack and I hear, well, Daisy thinks this about Lucy. Like, shut up. Just stop. I don't care what Daisy thinks about Lucy, and I
now.
don't care what Pedersen thinks about Miller or Miller thinks about Pedersen. There have been hot-headed guys on so many successful teams and unsuccessful teams. There have been guys who are complete hardos and just want nothing but the will to win. And I haven't had to hear all about what might or might not be going on. So I'm not going to keep feeding you guys what might or might not be going on. Let's move on to a bunch of teams that have a lot of positive things going on. Aiden, let's start with the Detroit Red Wings, who replaced their coach, Derek Lalonde, with veteran coach Todd McClellan, and the boys are buzzing. What's happening with the Wings?
Yeah, it looks like the season is turning right around. Vladimir Tarasenko also finally scored. It had been like I think 17 games, and he scored twice against San Jose last night. So
Hell
that's a
yeah.
Vladimir Tarasenko dub. Um, but the Wings, yeah, like McClellan has been around the block, right? So honestly, like I never really know what to expect when you see like a coach that's just been everywhere and had varying levels of success at every different place because for every Todd McClellan massive success story, you're going to have guys that just don't fit in. But he seems like very, very, very much a fit with this team right now, and Lucas Raymond is playing some unreal hockey under him, right? Like he's been really good all season, but I think he's on a 5 game point streak now, and of those 5 games, 3 of them I think are multi-point games. That's the run Raymond's on in the last or at
Yeah,
least since
he's sick in fantasy.
yeah since the turn of the new year. Um, you've got Dylan Larkin and Alex DeBrincat. Patrick Kane is finally starting to score as well. Like it had taken him a little while to get going this season, but he's up to 27 points in 38 games. Like I said, Tarasenko finally got himself off the schneid. And I finally like what this defense looks like, James. I, for a long time, just didn't understand where these pieces were going to end up slotting in. But um, Jeff Petrie and Justin Hall and Ben Sherrod have all been much, much better under this McClellan system. I've been a fan forever of Simon Edvinsson. I think he's having an excellent season, like both at both ends of the ice. I didn't actually expect his offensive game to be this good right now. I thought it was going to take him a little bit to grow into that part, but him and Moritz Seider are both scoring at a really, really, really high rate for this team. Like it's at the point where they want to be in the playoffs, right? So
Hmm.
I would say they're going to buy at the deadline hard. Like I would be shocked if we don't see them like go and get a big forward to help out.
Okay. We can talk more about that later. We'll have a lot of potential trade discussion later in the pod after we get through all this news. It's this time of year, it's something that's gonna be pretty prominent. Every time you open up a sports app, it's gonna be, oh, this team's interested in this guy, this team wants that guy, this team might be moving that guy. But I digress. Aiden, before the season, I predicted the Red Wings would be sick and they would make the playoffs and they would score a lot of goals. Maybe I was too early. I think what we're seeing is 120% of what this team can be. I think what we were seeing earlier this season was 70% of what this team can be. There's going to be a little bit of regression to the mean, but I do think this is a playoff team. Let's move on to another Eastern Conference team that, you know, There's a lot of positivity around, and it seems like everyone in the hockey world loves to talk about them right now, and rightfully so. There's a lot of good stories coming out of there. I'm talking about the Columbus Blue Jackets. The most recent thing I read was today. Kirill Marchenko spoke about playing on a line with Adam Fantilli, and he was saying something about how soon they're going to call him Adam Fantilikov, and he was just like he was so positive and so upbeat about this, kind of struggling young player that is going to be playing on his line. Like Fantilli's not super struggling right now, but he's not really popping off to the same degree that I would have maybe thought he would be already. And Kirill Marchenko has emerged as a dominant power forward with a killer shot and some wheels on him in this league. And I think it might be just the right mix. Now we're also seeing Dmitry Voronkov play incredibly well. Sean Monahan before going down with injury, point per game player, amazing. Love to see it. Zach Werenski in the Norris conversation. Every piece of this team is looking fantastic. Aiden, I would love to see them make the playoffs. It seems the hockey world would love to see them make the playoffs. Do you think this Jackets team can do this, or do you think this is a mid-season surge?
You know what it is to me? It's down to Merzlikins and Tarasov because I have a lot of faith in these skaters, right? Like again, I've been a Zach Werenski fan forever to the point where like my faith in him has really, really kneecapped me in times where I've picked him so high in fantasy drafts that and then he would get hurt. But like he has been the Zach Werenski that like it feels like he was destined to be, right? And it was just roadblock after roadblock for this guy. You're right about Marchenko, and Marchenko has been an underrated player since he stepped into the league. His rookie year, in 50 odd games, he scored 21 goals. Like he was scoring at a good goals per game pace from the second he stepped into this league. We've always known that Kent Johnson had this, and you didn't mention Johnson. That Johnson's a highly skilled player. We had concerns about him making it click at the NHL level, but both before and now since he's been back from his injury, he's looked really
Oh
solid in
yeah.
that lineup. Um, and to me, like you're getting even. It's not just guys that are maybe overperforming, but like guys like Damon Severson and Ivan Provorov, who I would have been a little bit concerned about maybe starting to see some regression from. They've been definitely good enough, right? Definitely
Provorov's
good
been
enough
more than
this.
good enough. Provorov's
Yeah,
been sick.
yeah, and Provorov's only 27, 28, so it's or I think he just turned 28 actually. So it's not like we're talking about two guys that are past their prime or over the hill, but um, you've got Dante Fabro who's come into this team and again been the Dante Fabro that you just wasn't able to be in Nashville for whatever reason. Um, I would not be surprised, and I would be quite confident that these players all play good enough to stay competitive in the playoff race. It's just going to be, are they going to get the saves, right? Are they going to
Oh,
get the goaltending? Are they going to get, um, are they going to get the save at the end of the game to win it, or are they going to get the odd um, first start performance from their starter to beat a team higher in the standings that outshoots them, right? Whatever it ends.
okay. There is one more team surging in the Eastern Conference that started terribly. That is the Montreal Canadiens. We're not going to deep dive into them, but Aiden, I'm going to ask you one question. I want you to rank where the three teams that we're talking about right now are going to finish. I'm not talking overall standings. I'm talking one, two, and three. Who's going to have more points? Red Wings, Blue Jackets, Habs. Who you got?
That's a good question. I think it's the aggressiveness of the Detroit Red Wings that's going to have them in first place because I think they're the only one of these guys that buys at the deadline. Neither of Montreal or Columbus, I think, are going to look at this surge they're having in the middle of the season and say, okay, well, let's go trade a young guy for for a guy who's going to score some goals down the stretch for us so we can get into the playoffs. Like I think both Montreal and Columbus are well aware that their best interest is in looking big picture and looking long term. Detroit, on the other hand, I think at least thinks they should be ready. They should be good enough to take that step into competitiveness. So Detroit's in first for me. I've got more faith in Montreal's goaltending by a tiny little margin than Columbus's. So I'll go Detroit, Montreal, Columbus.
Okay, all right. I would have gone Detroit, Columbus, Montreal personally. I like the well-roundedness of the roster in Columbus a little bit more. But you know what? I don't really think it's that far apart, so I'm going to give us both being right on that one somehow. Um, You
We'll see.
know, but watch Detroit fall off a cliff, and we're
Yeah,
gonna go
just like
both wrong.
they're gonna go 0-10-0 after we release this before the next episode.
All right, keeping in the East, Aiden, something a little weird happened in Philadelphia, something to do with arena security. Tell us this story. Let's break it down.
Well, apparently there was reports. I'll see if I can find the source, but reports that the arena security in Philadelphia were confiscating Philadelphia Flyers' fans' signs ahead of their game against the Anaheim Ducks 4 days ago. This comes from uh, Charlie O'Connor. I saw the report on Puck Empire, so I guess credit to them on Instagram. That the signs about Cutter Gauthier were being confiscated before the fans got into the arena. Gauthier, of course, would not sign an entry level contract with Philadelphia and eventually was traded to the Anaheim Ducks. He's had a decent season there so far. Um, that was before the game. Um, again, I don't know what these signs said. My gut reaction is,
Quitter. They
yeah,
like to
and
call him Quitter Goche on social media.
okay, and if that's what it was, absolutely not. Don't take those sides away. Come on, guys. Like, like let's have some fun, right? Like, if the signs were to the point where you wouldn't want your kid to read it, okay, then no, yeah, obviously,
Yeah.
don't take that to a public sporting event. But if there were signs calling him quitter Goche, like I don't like calling things soft, right? Like I don't like because I think that's way overused, right? People just like to call everything that they don't like soft. But that is soft. With that being said, taking away quitter Gauthier science is soft. That's my 2 cents.
I'll
But
agree
then
with you
how'd the
there.
game go? Then how'd the game go? Because that's what we're talking about too.
Well, some people might have thought two not so impressive teams could be a complete shootout, could be really low event. But there's a lot of talent on these rosters. Was it a shootout? For one team, yes. The Philadelphia Flyers absolutely routed the Ducks 6-0. Jamie Drysdale, who was on the other end of that Gauthier trade, he scored a goal and had an assist. And apparently, there was some taunting going on. There were some Flyers fans who, you know what, I will say are very passionate, and I think the league is a better league when the Flyers are good. I thoroughly believe that. They're one of those teams that I like to see be competitive. Their fans are rabid, their fans are silly, their fans are crazy, and you know what? Above all else, they're passionate. They
Your
love
buddy Cole,
Flyers
your buddy
hockey.
Cole just turned off the podcast, just so you know. He
Probably,
just yeah, he just shut it down. He's not
probably.
listening anymore.
Very likely, as did maybe any Penguins fan who may be listening. And I feel like reasonably so. I like rivalries, but you know what? I like passion more than I like anything. And you know what, Flyers fans, taunt away. You have that right as a patron of your team's sporting event. Taunt away. Aiden, there is a player who has been out of the NHL for a little bit, not too long. I'm not talking Nikolai Kulemin long, but is kind of connected to the same team. Former Maple Leaf, among other things, former Dallas Star, former Duck, defenseman John Klingberg is supposedly wanting to come back to the NHL. And Aiden, you say he's linked to the Oilers. How likely do you think this return is? And is this one of those things where it's a mid-season random free agent signing and the guy plays a couple games to see if it works, and if not, he gets waived?
That's what I think it is, for
Ah,
sure. And I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen well enough before the trade deadline that they can then explore still bringing in another defenseman if this so doesn't work out at all. Um,
right.
the thing about Klingberg, like his mobility took a shot, and he had, I believe it was knee surgery, right, that he's now fully recovered from. Um, so I, I really, really think that it's going to be this guy's mobility that's going to decide whether he can really run anymore, because he had slowed down and his quickness was the only thing that made up for the fact that he was often out of position defensively, right? he was able to quickly recover and cover the spaces up when he would get caught out a little bit, because he's always been an offense first defenseman, right? Absolutely, like 67-point season in Dallas, and he's an excellent passer of the puck, right? He was on his day, he was a really good offensive defenseman.
I think he
Um,
walked the line better than just about anyone else, like walking the blue line near the middle and just taking a look, seeing what's near the net, what passing options are open. That back pedal, like the only guy in this generation I remember doing it better was Erik Karlsson.
yeah, I was gonna say Carlson's the only guy that would be above him. But yeah, like the Edmonton Oilers, I'm sorry, Darnell Nurse, Evan Bouchard, like you don't need another guy that you're worried about defensively, right? Like another offensive first guy that like it's not what they need. So if they can even get Klingberg out on the ice and see how he's skating, right? Like I was a big enough fan of this guy in his prime that I want him to succeed, and
Totally.
I I'm cheering for him, but the way he looked, especially in Toronto, was tough. Like he played some bad hockey with the Maple Leafs. He was not nearly good enough defensively to stay with that team.
Definitely.
And we'll see. He's only 32, right? We're not talking about a 39-year-old here that's trying to kick tires at a comeback after what should have been a career ender, right? Like power to him. Hopefully, if it doesn't work out here, hopefully it's the SHL, right? Gothenburg native.
I'm sure he'd love to take it home. Definitely. I talked a little bit earlier in the podcast about how this time of year we're talking trade a lot. We're talking potential ideas where a team could go, and the insiders are having a field day. So, Aiden, in the past couple days, Pierre LeBrun's been busy. He's had a lot to say. And this is a guy we usually listen to when it comes to news. And this is no different. Starting things off, New York Islanders forward Brock Nelson is drawing interest from other teams and predominantly the Dallas Stars. Apparently, they're eager to spend with Tyler Seguin being out. They're ready to throw him on LTIR. He's out still another 3 to 5 months, I believe. And I mean, why the hell wouldn't you go get another high performing, very responsible offensive center? Why wouldn't you do that? I believe Nelson's also played a little bit of left wing. He is very solid on the power play. This is a guy who scored a lot of goals in his NHL career, and from what I gather, he's fairly well respected among his peers. I think he'd fit right in Dallas. Aiden, are there any other teams that you could see him being a fit on? Give me one, and I'll maybe give you a return.
Ooh, put me on the spot. Dallas made that makes sense for Dallas, right? I'm a big fan of players, right? Who you look at and you say, anybody goes down on our forward core, Brock Nelson. First
Yeah.
line left winger, Brock Nelson. Third line center, Brock Nelson. Right? Like
Second line center. First
yeah,
first
exactly,
line center with talented
exactly.
wingers.
Yeah, right. Like you could play put him on a line with Jason Robertson. They'd cook up something fierce. Um, put Johnston on that wing too. Why not? Another destination. I think Edmonton need the scoring, and I think Adam Henrique was supposed to be this guy. So to me, if they can make the money work for him, I think the fit there with the Oilers makes sense. But again, the priorities for Edmonton are probably going to have to be defense first. I love the fit there, though, in the spot that Adam Henrique is supposed to be occupying, because he's just not been good enough this season, right? Like to be that veteran third line center who can pop up with goals at the right time, right? Like that, he's not playing good enough for a team that wants to win the Stanley Cup. So I have that thought, right? Again, I see the Oilers play a lot, so they're front of mind. Um,
Would you see Matt Savoy being a return piece?
no, I don't think they give him up. He's the one prospect that, like, I think it would have to be the break glass in case of emergency return, and I don't know if I don't know if they'll like it'll be like it's this defenseman that will suddenly solve our top four problems, and the only thing they'll take is Savoy, right? Like, I think that's the only way they make the move, because he's also playing crazy good right now. He's on a tear in Bakersfield,
Okay.
so the organization's really high on him right now. Detroit's the other one, right? We were just talking about the Red Wings too, and I know they've got a forward core that has the veteran presence on it already. But again, why? Who's playing second line center right now? Is it JT Compher? Because
Yeah,
I think JT Compher is a really great third line center. I'll tell you that, right? And again, if you're a team that wants to be in the playoffs and play well in the playoffs, I love the idea of bringing in a guy who you can reliably say any one of the 12 forward positions or five power play positions or two penalty kill positions that you're going to be asked to occupy. I know you can do it, right? Like that's a valuable
totally.
guy to have.
All right, moving on. Another update from LeBron. There has been a little bit of talk about Dylan Cousins, whether it's the Sabres saying they don't want to move him, whether it's insiders saying that he's drawing interest. Pierre LeBrun says that the Calgary Flames have inquired about Dylan Cousins, but that's not the only player they're looking at. He hasn't specified who, but apparently they're looking at right shot centers. I'm not sure who else that may be around the NHL. I'm not going to speculate on who that may be. But I love the Dylan Cousins fit in Calgary. This is a guy from Whitehorse. He's a true North Canadian, and he's such a solid guy from all accounts. He's just like a salt of the earth Canadian hockey player to the point where I'm surprised he's not from Saskatchewan. He gives off the whole like Sasky boy vibe, like he seems like he could work on a farm in his off season. He's that kind of dude. The workhorse from Whitehorse. And imagine the workhorse from Whitehorse playing in Calgary. I'd love to see it. Center, right wing, whatever it may be. It seems like the Flames want a retool as opposed to a full rebuild. That's something they're leaning towards. That's something they've kind of been building towards. That's something they've been playing towards this season.
Well, and James, I don't know if that would have been the plan, right? Like it kind of seemed like they've now stumbled into that based on A, how good the players they already have are playing, and B, how good they've managed to restock the prospect cupboard
Oh
in just
yeah.
the last 2 years alone, right? Like again, I'm always a big proponent of the huge teardown rebuild because generally that's the only way to get those high end players. James, they got a top three pick at ninth overall last year. I'm telling you that right now. They got a top three talent, Zane Perek. I don't know what I don't know what the first eight teams or Hockey Canada as a whole doesn't see in the guy, but I like that already just jump started the what the rebuild would have been, right? Because now you have talented enough guys in him and Hansek, Zeri, the way he's played this year, Coronado, the way he's
Coronado,
played
yeah.
this year. Um, you have the talent there to now say, yeah, you know what? If you can bring in a 23-year-old Dylan Cousins, yeah, like let's bring him in, and if he can be the guy in that top six with Connor Zeri, like win some hockey games. Yeah, why not?
And you know what? Speaking of that core that they have there and the high-end talent that they have around, they have, in my eyes, a top pair defenseman in Rasmus Anderson. Earlier
Yeah.
this season, even going to the offseason, in the offseason, I was talking about potential Rasmus Anderson trades. Remember when I kicked the tires on Josh Norris for Rasmus Anderson? That was something I thought might be a nice move, a nice fit for both squads. But you know what? According to Pierre LeBrun, the Flames are saying that they are not trading Rasmus Anderson. He's signed through next season at a very manageable, I want to say 4.5 million or so. If I'm wrong about the cap, it's not far off. And then on top of that, Anderson has said that he does want to stay in Calgary. He likes being there. He likes the team. He likes growing up and living there. It's been a good fit for him. It's been a good fit for the organization, and it's a marriage that does not look like it's heading towards divorce. That's kind of a big hit for the trade market. This was without a doubt the best defenseman available for trade in my eyes. But maybe he was never available for trade. Maybe that was another thing where the media, the fans, everything just went a little bit rampant with speculation. Um, I don't really see him getting moved after all these comments, but crazier things have happened. But with this whole retool idea, signing him long term as of July 1st is that kind of extension is probably going to be on top of mind for the organization. One more thing I wanted to touch on in the whole trade world. Josh Yeo of The Athletic is a fairly vocal guy often there's a lot of things he says. I remember when Line was on the block in Columbus, Josh Yeo was all over that Pittsburgh are aggressively pursuing him. Well, they didn't get Line. They got a couple other things. They made a lot of savvy moves, in my opinion, over the last, I don't know, 8 months. But he says that no Penguin without a full trade clause, a full no trade clause. I'm talking Malkin, I'm talking Crosby. I don't know if Letang has one of those. I'm assuming he does. But I should probably look into that before I spout off about it, but whatever. If you don't have one of those full no trade clauses, you're not safe. You're gone. If a team comes barking with assets, that player is going to get moved. That's what Yo is saying, and that's what makes the most sense, Aiden. That makes a ton of sense. Why the hell wouldn't they do that? We've talked about it a lot. And if this is a team that's not going to make playoffs, and with this Eastern Conference wildcard race heating up, to me, it doesn't really matter how well they play. I don't think they have the roster. If they do make it, they're going to be a second wild card and get smoked. It's quite unfortunate to say that about the team Sidney Crosby plays for, but I digress. I don't really see a world where they're trading half their roster this season. This is probably a next year and a half kind of thing, but Aiden, is there one player you could see getting moved on that off that roster other than the obvious Marcus Pettersson this season?
Yeah, Marcus Pedersen's the big one, and again, I'm a big fan of him. To me, he's kind of like Matthias Ekholm light, right? Like
Totally.
the Walmart Matthias Ekholm per se. Um, but yeah, Ricard Raquel makes sense because he's playing so well. He's got 22 goals this year. He's 31 years old.
Oh, he's
Um,
playing great.
yeah, and he's not super expensive at 5 million bucks. Don't think you would really have to push to get a little bit of retention on there either. Brian Rust has 17 goals. He's 32. Like I Matt Grzelcyk though would probably be the biggest one for me because he checks boxes for so many teams and he's only making like $2.75 million this season. So just in terms of like a supply and demand, right? Like you just talked about the fact that the best defenseman on the trade market by a long shots off it with Rasmus Anderson, Matt Grzelcyk to me would make a lot of sense for a lot of teams that need to add. So Grzelcyk just from the teams wanting him are going to be there, and the fact that he is probably going to be able to be fit into almost any team at the trade deadline, right? With how cheap he is.
Aiden, last player we have on our list for this little trade blurb is Yanni Gord of the Seattle Kraken. He was a big piece of the roster on in their first season, but he seems like the kind of guy a lot of playoff teams would want. You think about how good he was for that Tampa Bay Lightning team and how big of a piece he was when they won that cup. Do you think he fetches much of a return, and if so, from where?
Yeah, I do. I think there's going to be a team that looks at even with the fact that he hasn't scored too much this season, he's only got 6 goals, but the playoff pedigree that he comes with, in my opinion, is very valuable to teams that want to make a push, right? Per the fourth period, it's Washington, Tampa Bay, Toronto, and Vegas. And to me, this guy screams Vegas Golden Knights in the playoffs, right? Like I think
Right.
this makes a lot of sense for the Knights. He's expensive, right, against the cap, so Vegas would, need to put in the work to make it work, even just on the salary cap front. But yeah, this is a guy who, especially in the bubble, to me, like elevated his game big time. Um, and don't forget, he's got like a 65-point season under his belt from his time in Tampa. Like he excelled big time in the playoffs in a third line center role. But this is a guy who you put him in your top six with some talented players, he can put the puck in the net too.
Totally. And at age 33, he's not exactly over the hill. He still has a lot of gas left in the tank. I mean, he is far removed from that actual, yeah, 64 points. That's nothing to shake a stick at. But I mean, his first two seasons in Seattle, 48 points each, and not exactly playing on a powerhouse offensive team. So, I mean, it's there. The skills are there, the tools are there, and you're right. Exactly the kind of player you want on your team in the playoffs. Aiden, I think that's it for this portion of the podcast. I think we take it over to Junior. And there was one notable thing in Junior over the past month, the World Junior Hockey Championship. A big part of this podcast, something Aiden and I both look forward to. But you know what? I'm not looking forward to it as much next year. Is that bad to say?
No, but I disagree because
I
right
just
now,
I don't care as much after what I feel I watched at times.
okay, no, tell me why.
Um, I've watched a lot of hockey in my life. A lot. To the point where I think other than sleeping and eating, it may be the thing I've done the most. I mean, maybe video games, I might have done that more. Maybe watching other TV, I might have done that more. But I have never, ever watched hockey where twice in one game, the refs will call a penalty and then they're so not confident and so unsure of what they're going to do that they're like, let's even it out and let's give a guy an embellishing call on the other team. And then there's no power play. Why'd you call a penalty in the first place if you're just gonna even it out twice in the same game? And this is something I think that happened three, four times in the tournament. I don't think I've seen it more than twice in my life. Like I could think of maybe one or two NHL examples of this happening, and not really to the point where they're worth diving into. But I was pissed, man. I was
But
so pissed. I didn't even like watching it. There were a couple games where it was like, okay, sure, yeah, this is good hockey. This is great hockey, in fact. I love the physicality. I love the passion, love the raw emotion. But I mean, I'm sorry I'm drawing this out because there's so much you guys have to listen to, but I feel the need to explain why I'm watching the gold medal game at Aiden's place with his friends, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Just kind of want to see someone lose.
I didn't think that's the direction you were going to go with it. I almost feel like this is a conversation I have multiple times a year, and it needs to be repeated every time because people have short memories. And this time, James, your short memory is that every single year in the World Juniors, because double IHF refs and the double IHF rule book that they are made to enforce suck. It
Really?
sucks
But it
every
never
year.
sucks this much.
Okay, but we say that every year, in my opinion.
No,
I've heard that
no,
before. I've heard
no,
that before, man.
no.
Listen, I've absolutely heard that before. And we can dive into that Canada, like we'll get to Canada, Czechia, because that one for sure had two of the embellishment things you're
Uh,
talking about, as well as kneeing penalties that drew a lot of attention.
Kneeing. Ugh.
Um, jeez, man. So yeah, let's the embellishment calls. You know what, James? I get it in specific situations, right? Where if you're a referee and there's a scrum going on in front of the net and the defenseman's definitely taking it way too far, and you also see the forward at the end of it just flail his arms and hit the ground, like a soccer esque, right? I don't hate the concept of doing that when there's a so obviously it was so obviously an infraction on the defending player who was slashing him, cross-checking him, whatever, and then it was such an over-the-top dive because chances are, again, the next time that guy's in front of the net, he's not going to go over the top, and the next time that player is in a battle, he's not going to hit the ice that fast, right? And I can respect the control the referee's trying to have of the game. But let's talk specifically about the Canada Czechia examples, right? Because that's the one I have in my head right now. because that happened twice. It was once on each side where it was an infraction on Berkeley Catton from one of the Czech underage players because he had a cage on. I don't remember his name, but he gave Catton a couple cross checks in front of the bench. Um, Again, it looked soft on both sides a little bit to me, right? Like I didn't think it was a cross-checking penalty, and I didn't really think that Catton, you know, like it was a little bit soft of him to go down on it, but wasn't definitely wasn't like the worst dive I've ever seen, right? I thought we
No.
could have just I thought we could have just let the whole thing go, right? So again, same result. Why are we calling it? I can understand that. Again, especially in the game. We'll get to the game itself because the officiating as a whole was
A joke?
unfortunately, yeah, unfortunately, it was the biggest story of the game because the two teams I thought played an excellent hockey game. Canada and Czechia
Really?
both
Yeah.
like it was a very exciting game, and so it a took away from how good of a game it was, and B took away from how good of an accomplishment from the Czechs again. Right? Like I thought that the Czech and the Czech players weren't getting the credit they deserved simply because of the story that was made out of the officiating, and rightly so because of again the degree to which it was as bad as it was. Um, the second example though, James, is where I do have a problem with it, right? Because it, it was Peter Sikora busting in, and Andrew Gibson and Tanner Molendijk kind of both came back and rubbed him out a little bit. And Sikora is 100% of the time going into that.
Wait, Adam Sakura?
Peter Sikora was the Czech player, was the in this
Oh, yeah. Sakura, yeah.
particular um incident. And Sikora got the dive, but again, it's the okay, if you're gonna call a dive, in my opinion, like there's like the Catton one I stomached a little bit more because it did like you can make the argument that yes, there was a cross check and yes, there was embellishment. But to me, when you see a player get tripped, like either I think either he got tripped or he doesn't get tripped. Right? Like I actually think that's kind of cut and dry. I don't really like seeing tripping penalties and embellishment penalties. And they might have ended up giving Gibson a slash or something. But realistically, Sikora was trying to cut through the defense and was tripped to the ice, and that was what the infraction was. They might have called it slashing, but it really looked like there was no penalty at all in the Canadian, right? And so again, if we're going to say that this embellishment was strong enough to call, like I think at some point the embellishment, hockey fans aren't soccer fans, right? Soccer fans stomach this and it's part of the game and whatever. Hockey fans hate this, man. This is
Oh, yeah.
not something that anybody wants to see in hockey. And to me, like I'm looking at something like that second play and I'm saying that doesn't deter a guy from diving,
No.
right? In my opinion, because he went into that like 100% of the time he was going to dive, right? Like you could tell based on the fact, like he grabbed the stick, even I think of Tanner Molendijk, and pulled it towards him as he was like hitting the ice, right? If you watch the video of it. Um, so yeah, I again that was I definitely wasn't prepared to go on the embellishment penalty tensions as part of the World Junior discussion because but yeah, you know what? Again, thinking about it, you're right that it was very widely prevalent in this tournament, and obviously the Canada Czechia game was the big example.
Definitely. I mean, let's move on from here and talk a little bit about how this Canadian team performed. I mean, we've talked about the Czechia loss. Let's take it to the Latvia loss. I mean, we don't need to go too far into this, but this is a game that, I mean, before you turn it on and watch, you're expecting Canada to steamroll Latvia. What went wrong?
This Canadian team, it's interesting, right? Because we talk about the best on best, and we talk about the fact that Colton like our last podcast, we had a whole conversation about how Colton Parayko goes on that Team Canada to play a role, and there is so much value to that. There's so much truth to that you need players on the team that know how to do things that you need to do to win tournaments, right? Like that's a fact. But much in the same way that we're talking about teams in the NHL playoffs acquiring guys like Brock Nelson to fill out your lineup, what happens to Canada in this Latvia game is I think the most important player on the team goes down because I don't think there was ever a plan to not have Matthew Schaefer, right? And I
No,
think
the whole
that
team
was
is built around him playing 25 minutes a night.
yeah. And so again, much in the same way that I'm saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a Brock Nelson to put literally anywhere in the lineup? Uh, in the same vein, like you have so many options for offensive defensemen, right? And the fact that you wouldn't take any of them sucks because as good as I think Dickinson and Molendijk are,
They're not
the
that good.
role
They're not that good.
the role they were being asked to play was not was not reasonable to ask of them on a team that wants to win the tournament. And unfortunately, I think I think this group of Canadians, this U like the U20 group they had to choose from, there was a winning team in there.
Okay.
I think I think there was a winning group of players that they could have pulled out of there. Um, but the thing about a tournament, a short tournament, is your plans aren't going to go off without a hitch, right?
Mhm.
And I felt like Dave Cameron
Couldn't
couldn't
adjust.
he couldn't deviate from what the plan was. And the plan was they were going to get offense from these lines, and then these lines were going to shut down, and these players were going to PK. And this is where this matchup was going to be, right? And I heard it said multiple times on across the TSN broadcast that, oh, this team was built with beating the Americans in mind. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But
What about the other teams you have to play the whole time?
yeah,
And what if
like
one of the guys
Latvia,
you need is
yeah,
toast?
like it's and again, it felt like they were going to ask too much of an underage Matthew Schaefer. Let's also keep that in mind that this is a 17-year-old defenseman that it seemed like, based on that first game against Finland, it was going to be all on his shoulders, the success of this team, because that was he was the best player in that game by far.
Yeah.
Um, and to me, too much, I think people expected too much of Gavin McKenna, right? Like, if you think Connor McDavid in 2014, he was solid, man. He was a good player. He wasn't a superstar, right? Like, even young guys, even underage guys generally don't pop off at this tournament until at least their draft year, right? Like Connor Bedard comes to mind. Connor McDavid even is another guy that comes to mind. Jack Eichel was really good in this tournament in his draft year. That Finnish team with Laine and Puljujärvi, right? Like the underage players that take over this tournament are usually guys a year older than McKenna. So it also felt on this Canadian team like they were starved for an Andrew Crystal to be able to slot into the top six when the 17-year-old that you're asking to put this team's offense on his shoulders, uh, it isn't clicking for him, right? Like, and I'm not criticizing him because I again, he's underage. I thought he was solid for much of the tournament. He had some mistakes that got a lot of attention, and I understand why. Um, but overall, it felt like the team was built in a way that unless everything went to plan, it was going to be a massive failure. And I struggled to think why there wasn't contingency plans like Zane Perek as the seventh defenseman, even right. Like
Yeah.
you can have right much in the same way that I really wanted Mark Scheifele to be the 13th Canadian forward because to me, if in game three anything on that forward core isn't working, bang, there you go, there's your fix, right? Like um, you need those guys, in my opinion, in a short tournament because sometimes it just doesn't work.
Well, Aiden, I think we've talked about Canada's World Junior team enough. I think, I mean, speaking for everyone I know, they're kind of exhausted at the thought of talking about it. Most people I know just want to turn the page on them, but we had to address it. We had to talk about it because that's what this podcast is built on. And another thing this podcast is built on is giving players their flowers. And Aiden, I know you were very impressed with one goaltender in this tournament. Let's take it to Finland's netminder. Tell me what you loved about Petteri Rimpinen.
Oh, everything. He battles, man. That guy battles. And it's hard to scout goalies because you can only judge them so much, and so much of goaltending goes into the situations they're in, right? And the randomness that can occur in front of them. But there was not a point in this tournament where I wasn't confident in Petteri Rimpinen making the save, right? He was so good against the Americans, especially in that preliminary round win. And that was a really impressive game from the Finns as a whole. Finland beat the States 4-3 in their preliminary round game. I had him as my MVP. I don't know about you.
Okay. Fair, fair. I mean,
Yeah,
when the criteria for MVP is most valuable player to a team's success, I totally understand that.
yeah. And again, that's just that, and I'm a very true believer in that. Right? Like, if you want to have a best player and an MVP player, I'm super okay with that too. It can be the same player at times, but in this instance, I don't think it would have been. Um, because we will move on to how good the U.S. was throughout. Um, but the Finns grew into this tournament, man, and they so often do. The 4-0 loss to Canada, I didn't see a lot in them that was going to suggest they were going to end up as close to winning this tournament as they did. Um, I saw a lot of people disappointed in Consta Hellenius. Um, it's kind of the same thing that I felt when I watched Adam Fantilli in Halifax in 2023. It's yeah, the guy didn't take over the tournament offensively, but you know what? He did a lot of other things that would make me, as a fan of the Buffalo Sabres in this instance, very happy to have him coming to my team, right? Like he does a lot of things right. You can see how intelligent he is with a puck on his stick. Um, and that Finland team got the goals when they needed. Obviously, they got the save from Rimpinen. Again, it impresses me how good the team is without the superstars that the other nations have, right? And
Right.
how strong they play. And huge credit for the win over Sweden in the semis. That was a thriller.
Definitely. Let's move on to that American team. That American team that, I don't think it was a shock to that many people that they were able to take the dub, win another gold medal. Another gold medal being a back-to-back, the first one for the Americans in their history in the World Junior Hockey Championship. What a roster, top to bottom. I love so many players. Logan Hensler, stoked. Love him. Really enjoyed it. Whoever ends up with him in this year's NHL draft is going to be a very happy customer. James Hagen's everything as advertised. Like what a full package that guy brings to the
Yeah.
table. Ryan Leonard, the guy was just a showstopper. I mean, he had his, shifts off here and there that I felt like, but the thing I noticed most from him, and everyone's gonna go to the highlights and everything, but I'm gonna go to the passion in each play. The guy didn't want to win. He wanted to bury the other team. He wanted the other team to lose more than he wanted his team to win. And
I
that's what
think
I
it was in
saw.
the I think it was in the Canada US game, and it was after a play in which he walked down the right hand side with the right hand shot and ripped a wrister, and it blew past Carter George's glove and hit the post, and he didn't score, went out. But Mike Johnson said over the replay of the shot that Ryan Leonard shoots the puck like he's mad at it, and you
Oh
can
yeah.
yeah, and he does everything on the ice, like right, like with that same vigor. Washington, man, like again, much in the same way that I just said Calgary got a top three talent at 9, Ryan Leonard at eighth overall is looking better and better for that team, right? This is a guy who I think has a lot of growing to do, but I think there is such a sky's the limit on him because you have so many of these young players that look at as good as they do. Do we have a power forward like him? I don't think so.
One that plays as angry as him in the NHL right now? Probably
Uh,
not.
yeah. Like
But with that skill level, no, I don't really think we have one of those right now. Time will tell if all of that translates to the NHL level, right? It's not always perfect and seamless, but I mean, looking at the package he brings to the table, I don't see why it wouldn't. I was thoroughly happy with everything he did. Trey Augustine, what do you have to say about him? I really liked most of what I saw. I mean, there were a couple things where it felt like he was out of position and had to really work his way back in, but the athleticism really makes up for it. What do you think he can do at the pro level?
Yeah, that he had a weird tournament because he started it off against Germany a little bit shaky, and then I did not think he was good in their loss to Finland. Um, but he steadied the ship, right? And you got to give him credit for being able to make sure, right? And he was very good against the Czechs in the semifinal. I thought that was his best game. Um, so he got it together when it mattered the most. And talking about Augustine, we might as well talk about that gold medal game in a little bit more
Yeah.
detail too, because the Finns came out and I got to respect the approach because it seemed like it was we know that this team wants to bury us, right? Like the U.S. would have been coming out in that game. They know they lost to the Finns, right? Uh, roaring to get out of the gates. And Finland just absorbed everything they had and threw it all back at them, right? And they got the power play goal to make it 1-0. Hagen scored to tie it. It was 3-1 Finland. And then you got the US coming back. Cole Hudson's goal to tie the game was something else too. Um, before Teddy Stiga scores in overtime. So it's one of those games where going into it, if you had told me that a team was going to score early and take a 3-1 lead out of the gates, I would have thought it would have been the Americans, right? Because it was almost like that US team in the first period and a half. I hadn't seen that group of players look so backed into a corner, right? So I think
I
whether
felt like
it's
they looked kind of calm, to be honest. I mean, calm as teams in a gold medal game who are down 2 goals. I mean, I think more teams in this style of tournament with the age these guys are at and with the emotions that come with being in that age and that high pressure of a situation, I thought most other teams and most other examples would have been in a worse spot in terms of panic.
well, and so I think we're going to end up at the same place here because where I was going to go would have been to say that I was massively impressed with the way they turned it around and the
Totally.
way they took control of the game in the second period. And I think we've given Ryan Leonard plenty of his flowers. But I think the guy that
Oh,
I,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
David Carl, he
For those who don't know
one
somehow, this
loss.
is the head coach of Denver in the NCAA,
Yeah,
and this is the guy who was the head coach of the U.S. World Junior Team, back-to-back years, right?
yeah. Um, Canada won back-to-back golds in 2022 and 2023. Dave Cameron was the coach in 2022. I don't remember who coached that team in 2023. Um, but James, like those Canadian wins didn't feel as assured as these US teams were, right? Both of these US teams under David Carl were the best teams in both tournaments in every facet, I think. Like they were the most physically dominant. They were the most skilled. They scored the best. They defended the best, right? Like there wasn't a thing on either of these two US teams that wasn't the best in the tournament. And part of that is just because this group of American players is great, right? Like you see it,
Yeah.
like if you it's funny, like we could have a whole podcast conversation going back and looking at world juniors periods where a particular country is very very good the way the US has been in the last 2 years, and then equated to look, this group also dominated at the U18s, right? Like, and it's just this American group that's been together has been very good for a very long time. So it's not a surprise, realistically, that if they were going to have a back-to-back champion, it was going to be this group of players to do it. Um, but with that being said, like the discipline that the hockey was played with under David Carl, I loved it. Like, and I hated it because this is the Great Canadian Hockey Podcast, and we want Canada to win this tournament every year, and we expect Canada to win this tournament every year, whether or not that's a reasonable expectation.
We
But
do. That's the thing. Every year
yeah,
going to this tournament, we expect to win.
yeah.
No matter the
Um,
roster, we think we're gonna win every time.
but from a purely like good hockey fan standpoint, it was awesome to watch this team because they checked so many boxes that you want to see, right? Like that you had the physically engaging power forward in Leonard. You had all the skill that Perot and Higgins brought. You had that hardworking motor guy in Oliver Moore, right? Like just so much of what I love to see in these hockey teams and boxes I love to see checked when I'm wanting to build one, right? Um, but I think David Carl's got a big future in the NHL. Do you know his story, James?
No, I do not. Oh wait,
So
yes, I
he
do. Yes, I do actually. He was a fairly highly touted prospect who was playing college and he had a career-ending injury. His younger brother, Matt Carl, actually had a fairly lengthy career in the NHL, but David did not end up getting to continue progressing. I want to say he played a little longer after college, maybe in Europe or something like that. Is that true? Briefly?
No, he was like a U18 star. Like he
Okay,
at
yeah.
Shattuck St. Mary's, he was like he was scoring like crazy. I almost don't even want to try and pronounce this. I did write it down. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, I think is what that says on the screen in front of me.
Cardiomyopathy.
Cardiomyopathy. Yeah, that was the condition and it forced him to retire just before he would have been drafted in 2008 out of Shattuck St. Mary's. Tampa
Hmm,
Bay took him anyways just to draft him because they said he earned it, which is a cool story.
that's really
They
cool.
knew they knew he would never play, but they took him with their seventh round pick. So he literally, dude, like graduated high school in 2008 and was an assistant coach at Denver in 2008-9. Like as a kid,
Huh.
he was just coaching that team. So he literally started, and so he did his 4 years at Denver, and was a assistant coach and a student at the school for all 4 years, and then he hopped into being an assistant coach in the USHL with the Green Bay Gamblers, and then 2 years an assistant in Green Bay, went back to Denver, assistant for a few years, took over as head coach. Yeah, they won the national championship in 23-24 with Zeev Boyum playing some of the best hockey I've ever seen a college player play under him as well. In that for the University of Denver, just obvious parallel. William was such a
Yeah.
big part of both of the two World Junior winning rosters. So David Carl, like he's in his mid 30s, 35 years old now, but he started coaching at a high level when he was 19 because it was he had to, right? Like as far as staying in hockey and as far as continuing to be a part of a team, like he so this is a guy who like
Eats,
his
sleeps, and breathes hockey.
yeah, and it's a story like no other where I love to see people dedicated to hockey enough that they will make so much out of any situation, right? And this is just another example. So massive hats off to David Carl. He's not coming back. It's confirmed. So NHL spot in the summer.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's coming.
Beautiful. Love to see it. Time to move out of the junior.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Where do you want to take this first? Do you want to start with the fun stuff? Do you want to, should we go movies or do we have more hockey?
I just wanted to ask James, like I do it religiously because I I'm quite sure it's just the play-by-play broadcaster in me, but I will look at a player always, and I just take into account the appearance of them, right? I memorize whether a player shoots left or right. I know that's a play-by-play guy thing. Um, but the other thing I'll always do is I will identify players skating towards me by the front of their jerseys. Well, 4 or 5 players a team are going to have a letter. So I will very often very heavily rely on looking at the left side or the right side if you're looking directly at the jersey for a C or an A to identify a player. Um, so this ad thing on the jersey is fairly new. While I was back in Vancouver for Christmas, I went to watch them play Seattle, and Seattle had some sort of like a commemorative patch on one side of the jersey, and they had an ad on the other side, and they
Oh,
had the letter there. And I was so mad. And I don't know if anybody else would be this mad about it, but seeing 3 things on the front of the jersey, and I know only one of them was an ad, but I wanted to throw up because, again, I'm not a fan of slippery slope arguments, but I look at that and I blink, and then I see those SHL jerseys that are covered like freaking NASCARs and ads, right? And I want to
okay.
throw up, right? Because think about that Montreal Canadiens C with the H, and I'll think of a massive freaking McDonald's M right below it, right? Like, isn't that something that makes you want to vomit? Like, because it does. So I know it's such a little thing, but have you noticed teams covering the front of their jerseys with patches including ads? Because I'm so not a fan of that in so many ways, to the point where I just want to almost know, am I crazy for, because again, it's me as a play-by-play guy too, right? I'm always just trying to identify players in some capacity, and I'll always take into account who has what letter on their jersey, because that's just how I watch hockey, man. But so maybe I'm just looking for it more than hockey fans would, and nobody else notices or cares. But that's my 2 cents.
I think it's a reasonable argument to not want too much going on, and especially in an area on the jersey where that is something you look for, something that has been your entire life. I totally get that. Now movies.
Yeah, I have one, but you go first because I just yapped about that.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a new movie I watched, and then because this is our first pod since Christmas, I'm going to give you the Christmas movie that resonated the most with me over the holidays. I could go for National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Totally, could go right there. I had a ton of fun watching that with my aunt and uncle. It really got me in the holiday spirit. But on Christmas Day, when I got home, I watched Home Alone 2 Lost in New York, which is probably my favorite Christmas movie. And there's this scene where Macaulay Culkin and the pigeon lady are like in the like theater place above the they're up in this like sound or prop room or whatever. And they're just talking about how they feel about people and being around people and how they feel about themselves. And it's crazy how a scene like that felt like such an organic conversation that a couple people might have together around the holidays about how they're feeling at this current moment in time. And I was sitting there watching it by myself after all the festivities have winded down, and I just thought, wow, this is such a perfect little moment encapsulated in time. Like you kind of feel at home while these people are talking and you feel like you're in that conversation. And I just want to give this like 20 some odd year old movie props because it did such a good job of making me feel something, even though I've seen it a million times before. So I thought that was damn cool. For a new movie I watched, Aiden and I talk about a lot of critically acclaimed movies on this podcast. This is not one of them. Um, I just watched the third movie in a popcorn flick franchise. I watched Sonic the Hedgehog 3 because me and my younger brother, who's 16, one of the things we bond over that we both fell in love with as kids, definitely different eras, me on the Sega Genesis, him on a Nintendo Wii or Switch or whatever it might be. Sonic the Hedgehog. I love it. I had so much fun. We've watched one, two, and three in theaters now, and there's no doubt that any movie that comes out in this franchise or related to it, regardless of our age, my younger brother Grayson and I are going to go watch in theaters. We will stop what we're doing. We'll go get in there. Um, as a total nerd, sometimes I am put off by the way that they change characters in a film or a TV adaptation. The character Knuckles in Sonic in the second one, they made him go from the like edgy, like kind of like mysterious, mean like character. Where in the video games I'm playing as kids, there's like rap music playing in the background. It's all the missions are in like dim settings and stuff like that. To I am strong and I am silly, and it's like Idris Elba doing this like weird, confusing, like fake voice. I don't know. It's really silly, and it's like something you would see in uh a straight to DVD sequel of one of your favorite childhood movies where they just like change a voice actor and it's just something really stupid. I didn't love that. But in this movie with Shadow the Hedgehog, who's like a huge fan favorite from all of this franchise, kids who played Nintendo games and Sega games growing up, Keanu Reeves voiced him and it was sick. It was dark. It was gritty. It was emotional and at times fun or funny. Like it made your caring about the character or the movie meter go up every time you heard his voice. And then I just went, wow, this is a way to do it right. And then the coolest thing for me, you know how a lot of movies, especially in franchises, like give you a post-credit scene, right? So you got a post-credit scene after like 2 minutes of credits, right? That was the bigger one. And then after the very end of the crawl. You sat through and wait for the whole thing. There's a second post-credit scene that's like 6 seconds long, just hiding in there. I love that. And I loved it even more where it's just me and my brother sitting there at the very front of the theater because there was the only seats left. By the way, I absolutely detest the very front of the theater. It is terrible. Your neck is just cricked up the whole time, even with those recliner chairs. But we got up and looked at the back, and there's just this couple back there, and like they're both wearing Sonic the Hedgehog t-shirts. Yeah, t-shirts. I don't know why that was so hard to say. But and they look at us and they go, "I knew we weren't the only ones." And I just love that little human thing where a couple people nerding out about the same thing are just like, "Oh, you too? Awesome. Okay." And then you part ways. Super cool, awesome experience. And if you like all that video gaming nerdy stuff, go give it a watch. Awesome popcorn movie. I had a great time. I will say the first quarter of the movie, I was like, this feels forced. But the last three quarters were great. And it's actually getting really good ratings and it's grossing really well. So obviously that franchise will continue. Aiden, what movies did you watch? Give me a little rundown.
The one I liked the most was recent, and I texted you about it. You know what I'm going to say. Um, I hadn't seen Sicario, which felt overdue. Um, I liked it so much more than I thought I was going to be honest with you. Um, didn't really have low expectations for any particular reason, just wasn't super like, super like thinking I was going to love it. I think this is such an ode to what good acting and directing can be because I think this is such an inferior movie without the credit that is due to Denis Villeneuve, the director, but Emily Blunt, Josh Brolin, and Benicio del Toro as well, because this movie, in my opinion, works because of the the fact that the fact that so much is shrouded in mystery for so long, and then when the questions are finally answered, the answers are quite dark.
Hmm.
And I think the movie's direction and the portrayal by the actors made the movie. And an inferior director and cast could have this movie could have been very bad, honestly.
Hmm.
But it shines because of the performances and because of the way Denis Villeneuve shoots tension and thrillers, right? Like Prisoners is another superb example of that. obviously the director for both Dune movies, which are on my list. I'll get to them. Arrival
Phenomenal.
as well. Yeah. So excited to see what he does next because these last two Dune movies both got quite the reviews. So hopefully there's more good where this has come from.
Definitely. Was there anything else? Any other movies you watch? Any Christmas popcorn movies? Anything like that?
Yeah, I always check the National Lampoon's box. Well, you talked about the Tim Allen Santa Claus movies.
Nice.
Uh, they didn't, or the first one at least didn't hold up as well as I thought it was going to. Like I had maybe too high expectations. Um, I know the second and third gets sillier. I'm gonna rewatch them too eventually. Um, but yeah, the first one was a little bit goofier than I was expecting in retrospect. But yeah, always the fun Christmas run through.
I think I think in this second, maybe third one, Martin Short plays Jack Frost.
That's the
And
third one.
yeah, it gets really weird. And I remember when it came out, my grandma and I were excited to watch it together because I was 8 and we love Christmas movies. And yeah, no, don't I honestly stop after whatever. If that's the third one, stop after two.
It's the third. I've definitely seen it. Like it's. I remember that. I
Actually,
remember
you
he
know
was.
what? If you're gonna watch them all, do it all. Why not? Why not, right? Let's get a little silly with it. But Aiden, if that's all, I think we're at the end of this pod.
Yeah, I think that's it, man. That was quicker than I thought it was going to be based on everything we ran through.
You know, we cut a couple things out. I hope you guys didn't mind the pace we pushed through, but it
I want to acknowledge really quickly. If you happen, and again, just by coincidence, if you happen to be listening to this on YouTube, thanks for tuning in. So, as many of you who don't listen to this on YouTube may or may not have heard on this us talk about this on this podcast. The podcast is on YouTube on a channel called Canada Owns Hockey, which has just been where I've thrown um, different videos I'd edited together since like I was early high school. And this year it surged in subscribers um, by quite a lot. And the last episode we put out was like far and away the most viewed episode on YouTube specifically that's gone out onto YouTube. So if you showed up for that one, which again, our podcast has never done numbers on YouTube. So if you did end up tuning in for that one and have tuned in again, thanks for finding us. The YouTube is definitely just kind of just a you know just a
an
little
extra.
hobby thing. Yeah, so it's I'm really glad it's brought you to something that I know James and I are really proud of in this podcast. So thanks for tuning in and everything. Thanks for staying with us through the break as well. And hopefully it's a week off or less till the next one.
Well, thank you guys all for listening. We'll see you in the next one. Without further ado, let's roll that outro. Cheers, guys.